One of the common misconceptions in coffee is that you need to go to a coffee shop to get really great coffee, when the reality is coffee shop owners like ourselves actually know the truth is that you can make just as good a cup of coffee at home as we can for you here. So on today's video, I want to walk you through 8 really simple tips to making better coffee at home. Now the first tip is kind of counterintuitive to what I just said. It's go to a local coffee shop, or even better, a coffee roaster. Not only are local coffee roasters gonna get you the best quality beans in the area, but they're gonna fill you with knowledge. They're gonna be able to guide you through the process of buying your coffee, making your coffee, grinding your coffee, and just preparing it. They're gonna give you advice. A local coffee roaster is so invaluable. So as much as we'd love for you to buy our coffee and for us to ship it around the world to you, go local. Going with a local coffee roaster will help you a lot with tip 2 as well, which is drinking coffee in its prime. A lot of people believe that you should drink your coffee as fresh as possible. Especially when it comes to filter coffee at home, there is like a prime of your coffee, a peak of your coffee. And that peak isn't the day after it's roasted or same day roasted. It's generally about 7 days after the coffee is roasted to about 21 days or even a month. In fact, the other day I was talking with some colleagues about a coffee I ordered from someone else. It was super fresh and the tasting notes were grapefruit and rhubarb, but all I tasted was Irish stew. It was really meaty, it was really strong, and it just hadn't breathed enough. It hadn't rested enough. It hadn't reached its peak. 2 weeks later, that coffee was super fresh, super clean, and actually followed the tasting notes. So try to drink your coffee in that prime window if you can, and using a local shop will make that much easier because you'll literally be able to pick up a bag on the shelf and look to see when the roasting date is and figure out if it's gonna be in your prime drinking time. Step 3 is grinding your coffee. Even more important than having fresh beans is having a fresh grind. When you grind your coffee, that ground coffee deteriorates a lot faster with oxygen. So if you grind coffee today and then use it a month from now, it's not gonna be that good. Ideally, you'd be able to grind your coffee right before you make every single coffee. And that doesn't mean you need to buy a really expensive €800-900 grinder. You can buy a simple hand grinder like the Hario Skirt and Pro, which is like 50-60 euros, and grind it at home. Or if you don't wanna grind it at home, a lot of local coffee shops are more than happy to grind coffee you ordered from them on a daily or weekly basis if you just bring it in. Not only is when the coffee was grinded important, but how the coffee is grinded. You can't just grind coffee and expect it to taste right. You need to grind for the method of coffee making, and you need to grind for the type of coffee. For example, East African coffees tend to grind much more coarse, whereas Central American coffees tend to grind a bit more fine. Also, a French press grind is really coarse, whereas an AeroPress grind is a little bit more fine, and a mocha pot grind is also much more fine. So you can't just grind it and then make a coffee however you make it. You have to grind for the method and for the coffee. Having that local roaster will help because they'll be able to give you a guide on how to grind for that specific coffee and that specific brewing method. Tip number 4 is another really common mistake, and that's water temperature. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to friends' houses who are making coffee, they boil water and then immediately pour it on the coffee. Boiling water on coffee is a huge no-no. It can burn the coffee, it can over-extract the coffee, and it can just lead to bad coffee. Coffee tends to be best when it's brewed at about 91 to 93 degrees Celsius. And you can achieve 91 to 93 degrees Celsius in a pretty simple way at home. Our espresso machines do it automatically, but at home you can buy a kettle that actually has the temperature gauge on it, so you can set it to 93 degrees and it'll warm the water to that temperature before you pour it. Or if you're like me and you don't want to spend $100 on a fancy kettle, you can just warm up the water to a boil, pop off the lid, wait 30-45 seconds, and the water temperature should come down to something closer to 92-93 degrees, and then make your coffee. That simple process will make much better, much cleaner, much sweeter coffee. Step 5 is actually a way you can use that boiling water, and that's preheating your elements in your brewing process. If you're using a mocha pot, add some boiling water to the chamber to start to preheat it. If you're using a V60 or pour over method, pour some hot water onto your filter holder and your filter paper. It'll warm up not only this element, but you'll get some hot water in your pot at the bottom and it'll warm up that element as well. The simple process of doing that, make sure that all your surfaces are warm before the coffee touches it. That way, when you're brewing your coffee, you don't end up with cold coffee fast. Essentially, you'll keep your coffee warmer much longer. Step number 6 is coffee ratio. Another massive mistake I see made from friends when I go to their houses and they're making coffee is not weighing or understanding coffee ratio. In fact, I'm not really even sure how people make coffee without weighing it. Religiously, I have a scale with me. I even travel with a scale because good coffee requires the proper extraction ratios. And again, I keep harping on about this, but your local coffee roaster will be able to help you with this. You might go in and say, hey, I've got this Ethiopia, I use French press, what should my ratio be? And they'll tell you something like for every 10 grams of coffee, you need 150 milliliters of water for a single glass, or 20 grams of coffee for every 300 milliliters. But you do need to weigh that coffee out. You do need to weigh out the water as you're pouring it in. So pick up a kitchen scale. They're not expensive. This one was like 25 bucks from Joe Frex, and it also has a timer on it. And that timer is really important for step number 7 because brew time is just as important as your ratio, or almost as important. I've seen people, for example, make an AeroPress by pouring in their water, popping in the plunger, and then just immediately plunging it down. And that can lead to under-extracted, weak coffee. On the other side of things, I've seen people make a French press where they put the coffee in, they put in their water, they let it sit for 15 minutes where they go do other things, then they plunge it and pour it, which leads to really over-extracted, overly strong, and bitter coffee. So find out what the proper extraction time is for your coffee and time it. For an AeroPress, it might be 30 seconds where you're letting the coffee percolate. Or with a French press, you might be looking at something like 3 to 5 minutes. It's something that you can play around with and decide how you like it and kind of figure out the way you like your coffee. Or of course, you can ask your local coffee roaster how they recommend that you prepare that specific coffee. And the final tip isn't so much a tip on how to make better coffee, it's how to enjoy it once you've made the good coffee. A lot of, let's call them old school coffee drinkers that drink these dark roasted coffees, almost drink them more for substance, for that caffeine boost, than they do for enjoyment. And they'll laugh at me for saying that I like my coffee cold. They'll knock back their coffee. If it gets cold, they'll throw it away. Whereas good coffee, in my opinion, should take you on a journey as it gets colder. For example, this El Salvador coffee we have here is an anaerobic, and it's a roller coaster as you drink it. When it's hot and freshly brewed, it tastes very dark chocolate heavy, maybe like touches of grape in it. And as you let it cool off, it gets to a point where it's cold and it eventually tastes almost like apricot, peaches, and a little bit of wine. It's a really incredible flavor journey that makes the coffee drinking experience just that much better. So don't drink your coffee too fast. Take it slow. Drink it a little bit when it's hot, a little bit when it's less hot, and then slowly carry it on until it's cold. In fact, this coffee has been sitting here for a solid hour, and I'm still drinking it. And it's still delicious, and that's how good coffee should be. It shouldn't be bad when it's cold. Anyways, we'd love to know what some of your tips are for brewing better coffee at home, so be sure to leave us a comment below. And that's it for us. We'll see you next time.